Following the Second World War, the remaining inner circle of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were placed on trial at Nuremberg. They were accused of many crimes, including crimes against humanity and war crimes, and some of the most high-profile defendants were Hermann Goering and Rudolf Hess. There were some lesser names that found themselves on trial alongside the main aggressors of the Second World War, and one of them was Alfred Rosenberg. Alfred Rosenberg was one of the most influential Nazi intellectuals, and throughout his career inside of the party, he held a number of different positions. It was he who provided the party with its anti-Semitic and racial ideologies, using what Hitler had written in Mein Kampf. He's considered one of the main authors of the Nazi ideologies and rules, including those which caused the Holocaust and the persecution of the Jews. But after the Second World War, he was sentenced to death for his role inside one of history's most evil regimes. So join us today to look at the vengeful execution of Alfred Rosenberg, Hitler's key theorist, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Alfred Rosenberg was born on the 12th of January 1893 to a wealthy Baltic German family. He was born in modern-day Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. It belonged to the Russian Empire at the time, and his mother had German and French ancestry, and his father was a wealthy merchant. His ethnicity would later be questioned by others, who accused him of having no drop of German blood flowing through his veins. He was even accused of having French, Latvian and Jewish ancestry. But the author of this open letter was later deported, with claims re-emerging inside of the Vatican newspapers. Once he had finished his schooling, he went to university to study architecture and engineering in Riga and in Moscow. However, when the Russian Revolution broke out, he and his family moved to Germany in 1918. They supported the Whites, and when the Reds succeeded and took over control in Russia, they relocated out of their home in Estonia. It's here where Rosenberg really demonstrated an early hatred for communism and all things communist, and he believed that the Jews were responsible for the success of the Reds, as Trotsky was Jewish. He arrived in Munich and began to involve himself in the life of the city. Following the First World War, Munich was a centre of anti-Semitism, hostility and anti-communist feeling within Germany. Rosenberg joined the then German Workers' Party and became one of their earliest members. He joined the party a full 9 months before Adolf Hitler would, and he was also a member of the Fool Society. He was at the time virulently anti-Semitic, and he contributed to his friend Dietrich Eckart's the Völkische Beobachter, which later became the daily newspaper of the Nazi Party. In 1923, Rosenberg became the newspaper's senior editor, and he printed in his time there anti-Semitic articles and writings, blaming Jews for the German loss of the First World War, and he also criticised the Weimar Republic inside of the publication. Through the newspaper, he was allowed to publish his own beliefs and theories, and it became incredibly notorious for its hardline stance and racial articles. In 1923, with Rosenberg working as an editor still, Hitler attempted to seize control of Munich and become the president of Germany. The beer hall putsch ultimately failed with Hitler's plans for the revolution, and following the revolt, he was thrown into prison for treason, escaping the death penalty. After this, Hitler then placed Rosenberg in charge as the leader of the Nazi movement. He was selected not with regards to his suitability for the position, as Hitler regarded him as weak and lazy. Hitler carefully chose Rosenberg, as he knew he did not want too much power, neither would he be too hungry for it, and when he was released, he would simply hand back over control. Hitler knew Rosenberg was just the face for the meantime, and the Nazi Party had found itself outlawed too, following the putsch, so Rosenberg's power was very minimal. Following Hitler's release, Rosenberg handed over control again, and then returned to journalism and began his major work titled The Myth of the 20th Century, which was published in 1930. The book dealt with key issues and questions around Nazi ideology, including looking at the Jewish question, and it became a bestseller, selling approximately 1 million copies. It was based on the theories of other racial theorists, and talked about the differences between Aryans and Jews, and how they were against each other. He stated how most of Europe's thriving culture was due to descending from German tribes, and he also debated religion inside of the book. He emphasised the importance of Lebensraum and living space for the Germans in the East. However, many of his fellow Nazis found the book hard going. Hitler himself criticised the writing and said it was something nobody could understand, but Rosenberg did influence Hitler. He helped to convince him about the need for revenge following the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on Britain and France, wanting to punish them for the First World War conditions placed upon Germany. He also convinced him that a serious threat to Germany was communism and Bolshevism. Rosenberg was later elected to the German Parliament in 1930, and he began to try and seek a way in which he would become more useful for Hitler. He began to serve as an expert on foreign policy, and after Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, he took over charge of the Nazi Party's Foreign Policy Office. He visited Britain that year to try and build links between the British Empire and the Nazis, but this was a failure. Rosenberg, during an engagement, laid a wreath with a swastika on it on the cenotaph, the war memorial on Whitehall for fallen soldiers. This was then taken by a Labour Party candidate and was slashed and thrown into the River Thames. Rosenberg continued to propagate his racial theories about the Aryan race at the very top of society, and continued to establish it as a master race. But compared to the other members of Hitler's inner circle, it was clear he lacked a lot of experience and authority inside of Hitler's cabinet. He wished for a better job, however was always bested by others as they had more experience in more high-profile roles, for example Goering being involved in the Air Force. This especially was an issue for Rosenberg after the outbreak of the Second World War, as he was not best suited for a militaristic role, and he was seen by others as simply a writer. In 1940, he became the head of the Hochschule, which was a ground for the party's future with regards to continuing and breeding the racist ideologies and theories. Inside of this was a task force set up to loot art and cultural items, and also his group, which carried his name, were involved in stealing art in Paris from Jewish families. Goering used the group to build his own art collection, and Rosenberg also collected the best musical instruments and compositions too. This became the most successful Nazi organisation with regards to stealing and looting art, shipping around 1.5 million railcars full of artwork and goods. After the invasion of the Soviet Union, he became the head of the Reich Ministry for the occupied Eastern Territories. His upbringing in Russia and his anti-communist stance gave him some authority on the Soviet Union, and as the Wehrmacht advances stalled, his influence was rather small. His ministry installed Reich commissioners inside of the occupied regions, and he was given regular updates on what the army was doing. Rosenberg did come into conflict with the SS, as he believed the Slavs were, although not as prominent, were Aryans. He also complained to Hitler and Himmler about how non-Jewish people were being treated in the occupied lands. However, he knew what would come with the mass extermination of the Jews. In a press conference in November 1941, he said, "Some 6 million Jews still live in the East, and this question can only be solved by a biological extermination of the whole of Jewry in Europe. The Jewish question will only be solved for Germany when the last Jew has left German lands, and it will only be solved for Europe where not a single Jew stands on European continents as far as the Urals." He would later claim at the Nuremberg Trials he was ignorant to the Holocaust, however he could not deny what was said at this meeting, with him stating the need for Jews to be killed on a mass scale. He had no problem in identifying Jewish men, women and children, and also Soviet elite communists for their murders, and the areas under his authority were the first to see the final solution carried out. By the end of 1941, over 500,000 Jews had been exterminated, and it was in his homeland Estonia that was the first to be declared free of Jews. Rosenberg did play a key role in the final solution. He spoke about it, preached it, and in his role overseeing these occupied Soviet lands, he was complicit in the fact it happened on his watch. The SS did carry this out, but Rosenberg did not object, just encouraged. He even sent 2 delegates to the Wannsee Conference to debate the next steps in the killing of the Jews. He remained in his post until the end of the Second World War and was captured by the Allies on the 19th of May 1945 in Flensburg. He was then placed on trial at Nuremberg alongside the other remaining members of Hitler's government to face justice for the crimes of the conflict. He was indicted on 4 counts: conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning, initiating and waging wars of aggression, war crimes and crimes against humanity. During his imprisonment, he wrote how that National Socialism was the noblest idea to which a German could devote their strength they'd been given, showing he was still a virulent Nazi. The judgment against him placed him as one of the main planners and aggressors of the invasion of the Soviet Union and also Norway, and the stories of his plundering organisation emerged. He was seen as a man responsible for the biggest theft of art, wealth, jewellery and cultural artefacts the world has ever seen. He was seen as responsible for this, and he was also a man responsible for the brutal sights that occurred in Eastern Europe, with atrocities, massacres and mass suffering caused. Because of this, he was sentenced to death and was found guilty of all 4 counts. He was to be executed on the 16th of October 1946 and was one of 11 men to be executed, but only 10 were, as Hermann Goering took his life the night before. He was executed by notorious US executioner John C. Woods, a man who did not perform his office as well as he could have done that day. A number of the executions did not go very well, as the trapdoor was too small, and a few condemned Nazis hit their heads on the door on the way down, meaning that some were bloodied, and also in some cases death took a lot longer than it should have. Some executions took from 14 to 28 minutes, with the condemned slowly strangling to death, as Woods had not calculated the drop correctly, which would have sufficiently snapped their necks. Alfred Rosenberg was the 4th man to be executed that morning, and shortly before 1:59 in the morning, he was led into the execution chamber, where the prison gym had a scaffold built inside of it. He was flanked by guards who confirmed his identity before they took him up the stairs of the scaffold to meet the executioner. Interestingly, Rosenberg was the only one who offered no final words when he was prompted, and as a consequence his final words have just been recorded as just no. The noose was placed around his neck, and he was shuffled over the trapdoor before Woods pulled the lever, and he plunged to his death. Rosenberg's execution most probably went as well as the Nuremberg executions did, as 9 minutes later Hans Frank was also executed, showing that most probably things went swiftly, and there was no blood or injury recorded when he fell through the trapdoor. Alfred Rosenberg is one of those Nazis who helped to spread so much hatred across Europe and Germany, and helped to poison the minds of the public, alongside people such as Julius Streicher and Joseph Goebbels. He was a man who regarded himself as an academic and a skilled author, but he was a man who propagated racist ideas, anti-Semitism and hatred. Because of this, and his role in overseeing much of the Soviet Union, which fell into German occupation, he was sentenced to death. Let's not forget too, that he was possibly the biggest thief of art, cultural artefacts and valuables that the Second World War saw, with his organisation helping fellow Nazis, including Hitler, get their hands on other people's property. Alfred Rosenberg inflicted such misery onto the world. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.